Who's this? Oh, you're an entrepreneur? Oh, you're a real estate investor. Oh, you're trying to learn from those who did it. Well, come into the lab then. Put your white coat on, gloves on, notepad, and let's build, y'all.
Real estate experiment. What is happening, y'all? Today, I have the pleasure of having Chris Miles on the air here, dialing in from Utah, and it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the lab, Miles, Mr. Miles. Miles is going to go a long way here with the cash flow expert that he is. But Chris is, let me just level set because this is interesting. We were talking about this offline, and we have entrepreneurs, we have real estate investors who are always looking to make their money grow and go further. And today we have a cash flow expert and one who has retired twice, which is really interesting because we're just talking about that, which I want to get into. But first, let me level set. You're the host of the Chris Miles Money Show. You're the founder of Money Ripples. We were just talking about, we've been doing this for a while. I mean, you were on your 500th episode. You just recently hit that. So kudos to you, because I know the commitment of doing achieving such feats. So congratulations to that. But then you also call yourself the anti-financial advisor, which is very interesting and unique. But you're here today. Welcome to the lab. How you doing today, Chris?
Hey, such a pleasure, Ruben. It's awesome to be on here.
Absolutely. So let's. I always like to say, you're a reflection of your business is also a reflection of you. So one thing I like to cover is a little bit of a background, and obviously those who are familiar with you are familiar with your background. You were a traditional financial advisor in the past. You were able to kind of break away from that and then kind of give people the blueprint of to how to really actually make your money go further, how to cash flow. But I want to level set because again, we're very we're drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, here in the lab, but we want to understand also where some of our blind spots might be when it comes to, areas where we can double down in. So let's talk about your blind spots that you faced when you were coming up, even as a financial advisor. What was wrong? What didn't sit with you right away? You're like, nah, this isn't going to do it. This isn't for me. What was that?
Well, it didn't happen right away. That was the problem, right? I worked as that traditional mainstream financial advisor for 4 years, and loved it. But there were a few things that started to chink at that armor, right? They started to weaken the armor to the point where I said, this is crap, because I mean, you know how it is. Like everybody tells you how, especially the last 12 years, the market's been up in the stock market. I mean, the market's averaged 15% a year for the last 12 years. That's unheard of in the stock market for that period of time to be straight up, right? It just doesn't happen. And so right now, like there's a lot of people that, especially guys that only been in the industry for like 10 years or so, right? They think the market only goes up, or especially the millennial generation. They're like, hey, the stock market's the place to be. It's awesome. Just buy a cheap Vanguard fund and buy the ETF, and then you'll just retire off that, just save up enough and you're there. It's kind of bullcrap, because here's what I found out, right? Because as time went on, as I started to see real results and real market returns, understand that the stock market only returns like maybe 7 to 8%, even if you invest in the S&P, right? That's the real return. So just know that if we're at 15% for the last 12 years, that pendulum's going to swing back to bring back to balance, right? That means it's not always going to be that way. And when I started to see that, I came in during like Y2K, in the stock market and stuff. So it was a perfect time to be able to see what happens when the market goes down into a recession. And I remember the first chink in my armor was my brother-in-law. So you guys have entrepreneurs on the show. He was a business owner. His father had actually ran away from home. He was 16, got his first business. He actually went out to Atlanta, right? Went out there, got the first Chrysler dealership in the state of Utah. So he came back as a 19-year-old with a dealership. Like, I don't know how he even negotiated, but he apparently had the gift of gab or something. Convinced them to even trust him with a dealership. And by 21, the guy was a millionaire. And so his son was my brother-in-law, right? And I remember going to sit with him. It took me 3 years to build up the confidence to sit with him, because I knew as a financial advisor, if I got in with him and his family, I was set for life, right? So I sit down with my brother-in-law, give this nice little spiel, and he says, okay, that's a nice presentation and all. So Chris, let me understand this, if I'm getting this right. If I give you 10 grand to throw in the stock market today, you're telling me I can make 12% a year, right? I was like, whoa, there's no guarantees, that's just because that's what past has done, since 2000 BC doesn't mean it'll happen in the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the average, right? Again, not knowing that's the average, not the actual return of the market. And he's like, okay, Chris, well, that's still $1,200 in a year. But Chris, I can take that same 10 grand. I can go put that in my business. Specifically, I could put it down. I basically put money down on buying a big rig truck because they were in the auto business, right? Put 10 grand on that big rig, turn around and sell it a few months later and make 20 grand profit. So why would I invest with you? And of course I was like, well, you should be diversified, right? Just given that kind of crap, the typical crap that they say, because yeah, business is risky, which is so stupid because if you look at the Forbes 500 list, who's there? Business owners, all of them, right? They're all business owners. Even if they're investors, more alternative investment space, they're still investors, right? They're still business owners. So that was the first thing. And then the second one happened from a guy I trained that went and left to do real estate investing. And I remember we had a call with him. It was the end of 2005. I was wishing him Happy New Year and stuff. And he's like, and we got this argument about what's better, stocks or real estate. And he finally just stopped me. He said, Chris, how many of your clients are financially free, right? Like where they don't worry about money. I'm like, well, some of these retired physicians, they're watching CNN. So if you watch CNN, you're going to be worried about everything. So no, nobody's free because they're all scared. He's like, well, good job. Way to go. How about this? How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning, but actually doing these mutual funds, these investments? How many of them are financially free off these investments? I'm like, well, none. Maybe this one guy. And I found out he wasn't either later on. So none of us were financially free off these investments. Even guys that have been working since the 1970s as financial advisors, they weren't financially free. So why would we think this would actually work for anybody else, right? And that was the thing that got me out of the industry. That's why in 2006, March of 06, I'm like, I'm done. I can't be in integrity, teach this stuff anymore. And that's when I was able to actually do the opposite, focus on cash flow and passive income and multiple streams of income and things like that. And I was actually able to get out of the rat race by that summer of 2006, pretty much doing the opposite of what I was teaching people as a financial advisor.
Okay, so just to level set, thank you so much, Chris, because I think that's super helpful for us to understand the background. And just so we understand, because some of us are actually jaded, right? We actually don't even pay attention to the market, to the market or the stock market, or maybe we're just in real estate. So my goal is to kind of find those blind spots. But just to give some context, you said 8% returns. You said, yourself, I really love what you said about the, making money off the commissions, but even then that wasn't enough. Because that's a real thing. Like the reason I have people on the show as practitioners, not people who are talking about it, but are doing it. And that's another thing that, when you're getting advice, are you getting advice of someone who, preaches what they practice? And if they preach what they practice, does it work? And in your case, okay, if I'm listening to you, you got my attention because now I'm hearing what's not working. But now I want to hear, so what does it look like actually when you stepped away from that job and you said, you know what, this blueprint does not work? What was the one that did work?
It was weird because the guys I actually met that were in real estate and business and stuff, they were helping people get out of the rat race themselves. I met them that were here locally in Utah. They were actually doing a little AM radio show, but pre-podcast days, right? Yeah. And they wouldn't talk about strategy at all. It drove me nuts because I'm like, well, what are they doing? I knew it was with real estate, but what are they doing? But they kept going back to the principles, right? They kept saying like, no, it's about the principles. Things like dollars follow value. You got to look for that value creation, right? Just like when we talk about value add apartments, like it's about how do we create value that can up the income that's coming in, the profits, right? Well, so, eventually I got to the point I was annoyed. I'm like, I got to know what these guys know, right? It was only like a month after I left being a financial advisor. So I started focusing on that specific principle. And I started learning that they were doing creative things with like lending, private lending and things like that to create more cash flow and stuff. But the thing that was big was it was that dollars follow value, right? Because what was happening is people were coming to me, asking me financial questions. But I'm like, whoa. I'm just a mortgage broker now. I quit being a financial advisor. I'm done with that stuff. But they would still ask me questions. And I remember one of those friends, he said, hey, well, do you like doing mortgages? I said, nah. I mean, I love giving people the results, but I hate dealing with paperwork. I hate dealing with people calling me at all hours of the day. Like, I just love to teach them and get them the end result. He's like, well, why don't you partner with somebody who would like doing that kind of stuff? And remember, in a scarcity world, like I was as a financial advisor, you didn't share anything. You just kept all the commissions for yourself, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, wait, are there people like that are crazy enough to want to do paperwork? He's like, yes, of course there are. So I found a guy in the mortgage brokerage. I said, hey, why don't we partner up? We'll split it 50-50. You don't have to sell them at all. You just have to get them into the program that I'm basically telling them to get into, right? Like you just deal with all the paperwork and the underwriting and everything. And so he did. And then I'd spend maybe a half hour to an hour with that client. And by the way, those clients, because I was trying to push people away, were really mostly just family and friends. I wasn't even building anything. But the crazy thing is I spent half an hour to an hour and I get a check for $1,000 or $2,000. I'm like, well, that wasn't easy per hour wage. What else, how else can I do this? And so first I started doing it not through like just investing, but actually through residual streams of income of business, right? It was like partnering with other people. Like, how can I be the connector? How can I help add value for people? And when I started doing that, it was only like a few different companies, people would always ask me, hey, who do you know that does blank? And it's because I would get asked that question over and over. I would say, well, it's not me. So who would be good? And then I'd make a deal with that business owner. I was basically doing what people now call kind of like affiliate marketing, even though it wasn't like emailing and social media and all that crap. This was all just purely organically referrals, right? But I was making $4,000 to $5,000 a month doing that. And by the way, to get out of the rat race for me was only $3,500 a month. So I was actually out of the rat race working a couple hours a week. Like I was doing the 4-hour work week before Tim Ferriss wrote the 4-hour work week. And it blew my mind. It was so easy because I'm like, well, what do I do? And I was still doing some active stuff because I just didn't know what to do with my time as a 28-year-old that could basically be retired, so to speak, right? And people were like, what the heck are you doing? And so that's why in 2007, I came out of the rat race to do it again. But to teach people how to do it, but I'll tell you, building in also the passive income streams with real estate and everything else that I did the second time around. And maybe we could talk about the first time, the mistakes I made there.
Yeah.
The second time around was actually much better, where I had multiple streams of income, residual and passive from investments that now put me in a much safer bubble, so to speak, much better place.
Wow. I love that because first of all, I don't know that you know this, but I actually did a TEDx talk around stop asking how can I and start asking who. Literally. I mean, you took those words. You used those words, and I think it's so powerful because we're always, and I did the same thing, right? I have out-of-state referral business on the real estate side while I'm here, while we're talking, right? Like I have a team, I leverage, and I think people need to hear that a little bit more because there's that active kind of go get them in that mentality, and then there's also the work smarter and like, wait, I'm already doing this. And you said the keyword value. How can I add value? And if it's not me, who is it that can help this person? Like, I just love that. And I didn't even know we'd go there, Chris, to be honest. So this is actually really refreshing to hear and reinforcing. So for someone who's in this position or listening, okay, I'm like in the trenches, I'm always working. This is interesting. How do I start identifying areas? And I always like to remove the friction. And I have a feeling you're the same. What is the lowest hanging fruit, Chris, when it comes to looking around your day to day and seeing, okay, here's an opportunity. Like, what does that framework look like for you, for someone that you start working with that you would advise?
Yeah. I mean, most people I work with are really just saying like, I've got cash sitting around. What do I do to get this working for me? So I don't have to keep working for the cash. Right. So, I mean, if somebody doesn't have cash, I mean, it's got to be labor, right? It's got to be, and it's got to be more creative from the mental space than it is from just the money plane, right? So like I said, there's residual income and there's passive income streams, right? If you
define the difference? Actually, I think that's important for people to understand. What is the difference between, let's get granular, passive versus residual? From listening to this, I'm like, are those not one and the same? What is that?
Well, they can be. I make them different just for my own distinction, because residual income, I say, is like passive income streams through business, right? Just like when I was getting paid by partnering up with people, I wasn't doing all the work, but it was amazing to get checks back for doing what felt like nothing, right? You could have online programs, if you have a business that way. Do you have memberships? Do you have, or subscriptions or things like that? What are things that you can get paid on a regular basis that doesn't always require you to have to keep actively working?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you and I know, I mean, we've been in the real estate space, you know, like I'm in one of the top real estate mastermind groups in the country, and seeing all these guys are like wholesalers and flippers that work 50, 60 plus hour weeks. They're making millions and millions of dollars, but they have no life, right? They
Exactly.
have no freedom within that. So
Mhm.
they're transactionally wealthy, but they're not passively wealthy, right?
Mhm.
And so, you know, creating residual streams to say, hey, I could, you know, I could stop working through this week, but then money will keep paying income streams in. That's what I mean on the business side, or residual income streams, right? It's business
Yeah.
income streams that you can set up the systems once, get it going, but then you just have to slightly manage it to keep those streams coming in.
Yeah.
On the flip side, getting your money working for you, that's passive income, right? Saying, how do I get my money work for me? Yeah, I might have to manage it a little bit, at least to oversee it. I'm not going to ignore it. You know, if you ignore money, I've realized you lose it, right? So
Yeah.
you can't be
Well said.
100% just turn your brain off and just go be stupid. Like, you can't do that. You got to still manage your stewardship, because the more you manage what you have, the bigger it can grow, right? But, you know, getting your money to work for you, you know, this could be buying, you know, turnkey or, you know, rental real estate. This could be putting money into funds or syndications and things like that, that are paying you regular streams of income on a monthly or quarterly basis, right? That's coming in. And that's kind of what I mean by passive, right? It's money that's coming in that your money's not working for you. And I think you need both, right? Just like I said, like I've seen plenty of people that, you know, it's easy to get the residual going. If you're a business owner, start there, right? Especially if you got nothing. But if you've got money, it's best just to get that money working for you to start paying you now. And so when I meet with clients, most of them say, hey, I've got at least a few $100,000 or something. What do I do with this? How do I get this to give me the best ROI I can possibly get? But more specifically, not just to get the best ROI, but make sure it comes back, right? And it comes back without you having to work your tail off. You know, that's the key,
Yeah.
because you can actively invest and make great money, but that's going to take up time and energy. If you don't want to use time and energy, then we passively invest.
That, Chris, I love that, and that's such a good question. And I'm wondering, how do you, you know, because obviously, folks listening may get a chance to reach out and work with you and your team, and based on what you're doing, what you're offering, right? But for our listeners at the moment right now, that's such a good question. My question is, if I'm listening to this and I say, okay, I do have, maybe it's 50K or 100K or a million, or maybe it's even just 10K, which I love that you touched on that, because I think some beginners need to listen to that. When you hear someone ask, what do I do with my money? What typically follows, you know, when you're, you know, consulting them? I'm just very curious, because that's such an ambiguous question that I'm wondering, how do you just, you know, okay, let's start at, you know, base ground zero. You know, I'm wondering what your follow-up question is. What is your follow-up question?
Well, it always depends on where they're going, right?
Boom.
It's always based on that. Like, where are you trying to get to? You know, what do you prefer to do? Because honestly, I think if you're going to do any investment, right, especially if you have to put some time and energy into it, you better love it, whether it pays you or not. Like, that's like the litmus test is, even if I didn't get paid a lot of money from this, would I still love it? You know, now you could do certain things. You could put money in syndications or funds. You're like, I don't have to love it because I'm not doing any of the work. Somebody else is doing it for me. In that case, you just need to have a good understanding and know who you're investing with, right? But when you're doing your own investing, especially if you have only 10 grand, guaranteed, like if that's in addition to having emergency reserves, if you don't have that, 10 grand goes emergencies just to keep you from falling on your face, right? You got to have that. Like, that's key. You got to have those foundational pieces in place. Cash flow has got to be positive. So even when I look at a situation, I'm also looking to see the low-hanging fruit of, well, hey, are we leaking cash flow anywhere? You know, and I don't just mean blowing money, right? That's what everybody thinks.
You talked about that. Elaborate on that a little bit. You talked about stopping money leaks. What is a money leak for us listening?
Money leak is either, it can be money that's just that you're losing that you shouldn't be, right? From an expense side. It could also be income that you're not earning, an opportunity cost that you're not gaining either, right? By the way, some of the biggest money leaks I've seen is the money that people never earned that they could have been earning, right?
How do you assess that? I know I'm stacking the questions as we're going. It's just because you're dropping so much value. So I know I started with, you know, what follows next after someone says, hey, I want my, you know, I have X amount of money, 10K, 100K, add the zeros, right? And then the following is, okay, well, where do you want to go?
Yeah.
And then you talked about, now you're bringing in money leaks on top of that question. And so just to bring it all together. So now we're at the money leaks, and now you're mentioning something key, that sometimes it's some opportunity cost that you're not even factoring in. So my follow-up question to that is then, how do I even know that this exists? How should I assess that in my kind of situation? I'm curious how you help your clients out when you do that.
Yeah. So when we analyze it, we have a whole spreadsheet we have them fill out. So
Nice.
The first thing we look at is income and expenses, like broken down, right? So we know where money's going and stuff. And then 2, what's the balance sheet? What are your assets? What are your liabilities or your loans and stuff, right? And just analyzing that. And so income and expenses, we want to make sure that you have more income than expenses, obviously, right? You want to be profitable in your personal life as well as like in your business or your investment life, So that's the first thing is, hey, are you leaking money? Are you hemorrhaging? Like, are you losing money every month? Because the strategy might have to shift to go away from trying to invest to, hey, how do we get this manageable, right? Or how do we hold on to more cash? And everybody's different, right? I got one guy I just talked to today that he's out in New York. He's been furloughed for the last year, and he's still supposed to be furloughed for another 5 months, And he's like, okay, I've got money sitting in my IRA. Like, what do I do with this? And like, hey, when the CARES Act was out last year, 2020, it's like, let's get up to that 100 grand, let's get that money out. Can we put it into rental real estate? For him, it was all cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. Like, we weren't even worried about growth. We're just like, we need cash flow. Like, let's get into rental real estate that's paying you a 10, 11% cash on cash ROI. So if he invests 100 grand, he's making about at least $800-900 a month. Right. And just trying to get him up to the point where he's replacing the unemployment he's getting from New York State. Very different situation than someone who's like a retiree from Boeing out in Seattle. And he's like, hey, I've got $1 million in my retirement account. Now what? It's like, well, with you, let's get that money work for you. We might be doing a fund that pays you 10 or 11%. We might be buying some like a fourplex, we might be buying something like that to kick off some returns for you, doing a mix of it. Maybe we get you that real estate professional status so that we can get all the tax advantages so you keep more of the money of the cash flow you're earning, I had a guy in California, he was different. Because with him, he's like in his 40s, he's a chiropractor out there. And he's like the ultimate Dave Ramsey poster child, right? A lot of my clients are kind of like the Dave Ramsey graduates that said,
no.
I did everything Dave Ramsey asked and I'm still not free. Like, what happened here? Like, yeah, debt-free doesn't equal freedom, right? Financial freedom. Well, he was the poster child. Plus,
really
whenever I get
important.
my Asian clients, they're always like the ones that are trying to save half their income, and he's definitely no exception. So his goal was pay off his house in San Diego and pay off his rental property in California, right? Which, by the way, if you have anything on the West Coast rental property, I'm almost always saying sell it. I didn't have to look at the numbers. Like, that's a money leak right there, because that's got massive equity. And I guarantee you the return on equity, your cash flow is low. And his is no exception. He has 600,000 of equity in that rental property. He cash flows $200 a month.
Oh my God.
$200 a month profit, right? And so I said, and his whole goal was take all the extra cash, pay both of them off in 6 years. And I said, well, what would that free up? He's like, well, I'll free up $4,500 a month. I was like, okay, year 6, $4,500 a month. Got it. And in that meantime, you're basically a paycheck to paycheck, right? You're just stuffing everything away to pay off these debts. But I'm like, what if we sell that property and get the equity out? Even if you got to pay a massive, seller's fee on that.
Gains.
Yes, it maybe capital gains. Like, say you even get $500,000, we could always 1031 to something else.
Exactly.
Too,
Yeah.
right. But say you get $500,000 of that, just go on the low end. Now it's actually more. I think he has like 600,000 he could get out of it now because the market's gone up, right? But I was like, you get $500,000 out of that. And we also do a cash out refinance of your house because his payment was on a 15-year loan. It's like, let's refinance to a 30-year, lower the payment, but get cash out. So then your payments are pretty much almost the same as they were before.
Right.
Now we got we got about $800,000 we can work with, that even if we made 10% a year on the low end, that's $80,000 a year.
Wow.
Or to put that in perspective, that's about $6,500 a month. And if you keep reinvesting that money, that $6,500 a month or $80,000 a year, and by the time you hit year 5 or 6, we're over $100,000 a year, not $4,500 a month, but $100,000 a year of passive income. And for him, it was kind of like I got to pay off debt. I'm like, screw that. Like, get that out of your head, because you've got this potential right here, sitting here, that we can take better advantage of. Oh, by the way, another money leak you had, taxes. So we're like, hey, let's lower your taxes. Let's do corporate structure stuff, with your business, and see if we can get more write-offs and free up at least 5-10 grand a year in taxes too. So all that adds up together. That's what you can find simply if you just look at your income and expenses and your assets and liabilities, but you look at with fresh new eyes of what's here, like what's not productive here. What can I do with this? What's this? Because net worth is worthless unless it's put to use to create cash flow.
I love that you said that, because I think that's one of the biggest thing that we talk about in real estate, or at least that we try to get people to understand who are not true investors. It's that, your house is not an asset unless
Right.
you turn it. It's a liability when you're literally working for it. You have to turn that into an asset, and you talk about turnkey, which is a model that we're very big on here. And it's just that, I mean, when I hear that kind of equity sitting, I'm like, oh man, you're playing the wrong game. What is another thing like that you hear, that you look at often where you're like, because I'm sure that's one for me. If I was in your position, anytime I see a lot of equity sitting in a home, I'm like, man, you got it. What is your goal here? Because what are we doing? Right.
Yeah.
What is another one? Because then I'm going to ask you, I want to transition to another question I'm very passionate about, but this is very important as far as stopping the leaks. What's another money leak that you often see besides, for our listeners, equity and stuck in homes? Is there another one that comes to mind that's really prevalent that you often see?
Well, one, just not tracking their money in the first place, right? That's always a big one. Track the income, not just the expenses, right? Savers always love to look at the expenses and get hyper-focused, try to cut down until they're dirt cheap. But also focus on the income too. You focus on both sides of the equation. See, spenders love to focus on income and ignore expenses. Savers ignore income, but focus on expenses, right?
That's so
A
good.
wise steward is right in the middle, right? It's just like the parable of the talents in the Bible, right? The guy that had 5 that made 5 more, versus the one that was a Dave Ramsey fan, buried his debt that he got from his master and paid the one back, said, hey, I paid off my debt. And the master says, get out of here, right? Like you're a horrible steward of this money. I'm going to give it to somebody else who will do something with this. And that's what you should be doing, is how do I become a better steward of this money? If both the income coming in, how do I maximize income and minimize expenses? But it starts, don't focus on budgets until you know what you've been spending on a consistent basis. Then step 2 is now we can create a budget, or I like to call it spending plan, right? Of how we spend the money. But give every dollar a job, make sure that everything is doing it that way. That's critical, because if you don't, naturally through Parkinson's law, right, which says whenever you free up, time or money, within a matter of months, you end up using it up again, right? It's like COVID. You remember, like everybody's like, whoa, things are shut down. Like, what do I do with all this time? Like, maybe I'm going to binge on Netflix, or I'm going to read books or work out, right? Or whatever people would do, right? And then all of a sudden, months later, people are still working from home, not commuting as much anymore in a lot of cases, right? But they probably still feel probably as busy as they did pre-COVID. That's Parkinson's law, right? Money does the same thing. You've got to give that money a job, every dollar, right? Even when you pay off a loan, you free up that cash, great. Use that cash somewhere else that it immediately has a job to do something else. And you start to do that, you start to find, hey, I've got resource, I've got money, this account is building. Now, where do I put it? So that's another big one. Another leak I see that kind of goes along with the equity side is people have money really trapped in their 401k or IRA prisons, right? Or in
I love your choice of words, by the way, Chris. I'm like writing down notes. I'm like, stewardship of money, giving every dollar a job. Now 401k prisons. Man, this guy, you're gonna be quoting you all day. You're gonna gotta get some royalties on these or some patents on these. No, the great. First of all, no, you're saying it in a way that's resonating with us so well. Talk about that, because I didn't want to interrupt you, but I did want to tip my hat towards you for the language you're using. I think it gives it more power. So 401k prisons, how so?
Well, like everybody gets these golden handcuffs because they're like, well, I get the match, right? And the match is piddly when you think about the grand scheme of things. By the way, a match, even if you get 100% match, does not equal a 100% rate of return.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody thinks that's the case, but the truth is that if whatever you were saving before were to equal 500,000, in the end, with the 100% match, you'll just have $1 million. Whatever that number is that you would have had yourself, just double it if you get 100% match, which now is starting to go away more.
Absolutely.
Now, think about that. That's not that may be 100% rate of return, but it's not an average of 100%. So the longer you put money in those 401ks, say it's 30 years, that doubling effect, when you have the rule of 72, you're like, well, that only gave me like a 2.5% return more than what I got in the market, which was all bipolar. Like, my ex-girlfriend, like you don't want that crap in your life. You want something that's certain, that's going to kick out money. And that's what I realized as a former financial advisor, right? The reason that got me out was, wait a minute. Like, I've been telling people to save up, say you got to $2 million in these dumb 401ks, and that would take you maxing out your 401k for decades to do this with a match. That $2 million. And now they're old, the old rule, and there's still some people that teach out the FIRE method, right? They say the old rule is you pull out 4%. That was an antiquated number from the 1970s. That 4% rule, even though the guy that created it thinks it's still cool, but of course he's vested in it, right? But the truth is, with lower returns in the markets and things like that, when you move into retirement mode, you shouldn't be pulling out more than 3% a year. So if you have $2 million, it means you live on $60,000 a year before taxes are taken out, right? So you're likely to live on $45,000 a year. Now, let's take that same $2 million, right? And say, like I said, you only get a 10% net cash on cash rate of return on that money. Well, that's now $200,000. And by the way, if it's real estate based, if it's more in rental real estate, whether it's multifamily or single family, whatever, right? Now you're getting tax advantages. You're writing off all your returns. That's like tax-free money. By the way, you can't save up enough in a Roth to get that much tax-free. Like Roth, you can contribute a whopping $6,000 a year. Like you're ever going to hit any financial goal with that, that it's just so dumb playing by these broke rules that they give us when we could do something so much more. So most of the time I get people, they're like, okay, I've got money in the market, but it's been going up for 12 years. What if it goes down? Like, what if it does go down? You just lost it. You'd be like my dad, and after 2000, when he thought he was going to be able to retire early because the Y2K, before Y2K everything was taken off, and he decided to invest in tech in 2000, and then it tanked, and he spent the next 15 years trying to get to the point where he could retire again. Like, you don't want to be that person. Everybody that comes to me are like, most of them are saying, hey, I'd like to retire before I'm 59 and a half, which is what my 401k tells me to do. They lock up in prison until you're 59 and a half or slap a penalty against you. Well, if I want to retire at 40, why would I put my money in that stupid place that I can't access for another 20 years? If I want to retire at 50, why would I put it there and wait another decade? So the objective that you have, the goal you have, the strategy has to meet that objective, right?
Yes.
Every time. But again, like people got so caught up in like, well, that's what everybody does, right?
Right.
That's not how you should be playing the game. Because if you go off what everybody does, well, guess what? Everybody's broke. Don't play by those rules. Play by the rules that we play by that have actually, like you said, been there, done that, and still doing it today.
That's so powerful. So I love everything you're saying, because it's, it goes back to the whole, it's the vehicle, right? Which vehicle, first of all, you talked about this, where are you trying to go? And then, what vehicle are you using? And if you're trying to go to space and you have a bike, that might not work out, right?
No, I've tried.
If you have a Tesla, that's not going to work, right? It doesn't matter.
Right.
You're using the wrong vehicle. So I want to touch on something. Let me ask you actually, while I have you on here, because I'm very curious of what your thoughts are on this, and hopefully this gives value to the listeners. Are you familiar with, and I want to know, are you familiar with, and what are your thoughts are, if you're familiar with the whole model of what I've heard, on the insurance, infinite banking, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that is I know that not everyone's using it, but I know it's been used, right? Robert Kiyosaki's, they've talked about it, the whole, is that something that some of your clients have used, or even yourself, that you can speak on that's powerful? And if maybe we might want to give the audience some light on this, it's basically like leveraging policies and you're kind of like, are you familiar with that model?
Yeah, I actually designed them myself, in fact.
Oh, awesome. Can you speak a little bit more on it for the listeners? Because I think that's maybe like a thing that sometimes flies over the radar, that is something that I'm starting to tap into.
Yeah.
But I like to do my research and then take action. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I didn't even hear about that whole infinite banking concept. For those that aren't familiar with it, basically it's taking whole life insurance policies. And if you know, like term insurance is just basic insurance, it's really death insurance. There's no cash in there. It's just you die, you get paid. But with whole life, just like with universal life, right? There's that component where it builds up cash, like this tax-free savings. It's kind of like a Roth IRA, but no limits on the upper limits, right?
Yeah.
And so you could save in it and stuff. But then you can access the cash. You can borrow from it from the insurance company, right? So you're borrowing from the insurance company from your one hand while they're still paying you returns on it. So it's kind of like a tax-free savings account / home equity line of credit that pays you interest, right? It's kind of what it is. It's like having a HELOC that you get through the company, or like a line of credit through the company, but while you're paying interest, they're also paying you tax-free interest on top. So you're able to, if you do it right, especially with investing in real estate and even in your business too, right? Like in things that can create more cash flow or good returns, you can actually start double dipping, making money in two places at the same time, because the interest you're earning on the insurance policy is more than it costs you on the loan. And again, you're borrowing from your own money. It's just like a secure line of credit, right?
Yeah.
But at the other side, then you're making money in your investment or your business. So you're making money in two places at the same time. So like if I show people that if they're getting a real estate property that pays them a 12% cash on cash return, if they use their life insurance to fund the down payment, and they'll actually get at least a 3 to 4% additional return every year on top of the 12% they're earning, just accelerating it much more. At least doing the strategy I teach it, right? Like I call it max ROI, infinite banking, the kind of strategy I do, which is max cash value, least cost possible, right? Like I guarantee that no one will beat those numbers, guaranteed, hands down, doesn't happen. But I'll tell you, the traditional infinite banking I learned from those guys that helped me get it out of the rat race the first time, they were using the crappy infinite banking. So they're not all equal, just so you know. They were like, put this money for 10, 15 years, and then you can access the money, right? They were like high commissioned, high cost life insurance that I lost during the last recession because I was pumping money into it. But then when it came to the recession, I was in the hole, 16,000 a month, right? That was about when I was negative cash flow when the recession hit me, right? When that happened, I couldn't afford to pay the policy. I lost it. I had dumped in 25 grand and I got nothing for it. It was like the worst, most expensive term policy possible.
What's a good way for our listeners to should I be able to access it right away? Can you touch on what would be a better model so we can have it on our radar if we're thinking of getting into this?
Yeah. I mean, obviously like, it just depends. Like I had a lady come to me from New Mexico, right? And she's like, okay, this company, Ohio National, which is a company I actually work with. I'm an independently brokered guy. And so I'm like, yeah, I know the company. They're a good company. And she's like, yeah, this is the numbers they gave me if I go and change this term and convert it to a whole life policy. And the cash value, like in year one, like they were showing her putting in like 20,000 a year, but she would have like maybe like 10,000 bucks in there in year one, which by the way is better than my first policy that I got, right? Because the first 2 years I put in 20 grand, I had zero cash. So it's better.
You zero cash available to leverage?
Yeah, zero cash in there at all. It all went to costs and commissions, right? That's the thing is that you want the lowest cost policy possible. Now it's not just the first year. You got to be careful of that because I work with another company that's a great company too called Mass Mutual, right? Like they have a policy where you can have 90% of the cash you put in cash value in that policy in year one. But here's the trick. They add additional costs in those later years so that by year 5, there's other policies that would beat it, right? So I use a policy where only 20% goes to cost year one, right? So if you put in that same 20,000 bucks, you would have about $16,000 in cash. And you can access that cash in that specific company from day one, really the first month. So I'll get real estate investors all the time saying, hey, should I dump in a ton of cash? I'll be like, no, like don't just front load it all in there. An agent would love you to do that. Insurance agents always love it when you do that because they make more commission. The problem is that 20% comes out and then you have to keep paying year after year, right? And so you don't want to keep dumping in money and then put in this huge high fees year after year. So instead you split it up, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds too much. There's a nice balance of doing it. Here's what should happen. Like by about the 5th, 6th year at the latest, you should have just as much in cash as what you've paid into it. So if you paid 20,000 a year for 5 years, you should ideally have 100,000. A traditional whole life policy, that would take about 15 to 17 years to do, not 5, but 15 to 17. So if you get that max ROI and you get it with the right design, the right setup with the lower type of costs, it's amazing what kind of returns you can get out of that sucker.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked that question. A little personal one for you guys. You guys got to check out Experiment Nation. You got to check out the episode that we'll have before this. I think Chris just went in a little deeper on it, which again tells you why he's the cash flow expert. But this is very good. One thing I do want to ask you, I'm very passionate about this. Okay. So a lot of entrepreneurs that are in here maybe have a job as well, which I would say in the beginning, I just had a shout out to Tony Watley. I don't know if you know, he's the side hustle millionaire, big good friend of mine. So, and I just had, it's funny, my firm, my team, my company is actually serving a lot of people who are transitioning as well, or going from like, corporate job to like full-time, either investors or branding. So it's interesting. So you talked about a key thing that I thought was like, why would I, in the beginning of this episode, say, why would I put my money in X savings account or the stock market when I have a business, right?
Yeah.
So, and we know businesses, and I was just listening to a phenomenal podcast with Patrick Bet-David about this with exit strategies and all that stuff. I mean, we know how large that return can be, right? And so when you're working with maybe an entrepreneur, or maybe he is / entrepreneur has a job, and there's money to be, leveraged, do you go into that person's business and say, hey, with the service or product that you're offering, have you also thought about, affiliate, within that vertical, almost like a vertical integration, which I love to talk about.
Yeah.
And I want to get into that just a little bit, because there might be some listeners who are like, okay, I already have a business. I get a pretty decent ROI, right? And based on what I'm hearing with Chris here is I'm leaving money on the table. What would you say? Is it the same conversation you're having when it comes to these money leaks in business? From your experience, I'm kind of curious as how you would assess someone. And again, encouraging our listeners to maybe tap into your network. We'll have the call to actions at the end of the day if you want to work with Chris and his team. But what is that upfront that you're thinking? If I'm an entrepreneur and you're making a decent amount of money, or maybe you're just getting started and you're cash flowing a little bit, what are some areas that you would tell them that they should look in that they haven't even thought about
within their business?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously price points are huge.
Elaborate on what price points for exactly what?
For their products or services, like, are they competitive? Because oftentimes I'll find people that are just trying to like become the cheap person, right? Become the cheap product, I had a guy that owned a mortuary that I said, well, hey, based on your area, I mean, what are they typically charging? And he actually offered additional value add services with his, right? And I'm like, you're by what I'm seeing here in the market, you're on the low end. What if we just got you to the average price, but now you're already delivering more value than people at average? Because again, dollars follow value. How can you create more value for more people? And so I said, let's just bump up this price of your packages, your funeral packages and stuff. And just based on his current flow, not even saying his increased sales, which was happening each year, on his current flow, was going to add $250,000 to his bottom line. It's like that did nothing. He didn't have to do any more work. He didn't have to do anything. He just had to say, okay, change, scratch out, new price, right? Like that's it.
That. Oh my gosh, I love that.
So sometimes it can be just so simple as something like that. I mean, you can add more products or services, like I said, like online stuff, things that can be more leveraged time, leveraging systems. If you're in a service-based business, I think, when people have you frequently ask questions, sell that, like if they keep asking the same question over and over, the dumb thing would be, oh, sorry. Yeah, I got an answer for that, but I'm not going to tell you. Right. The best thing to do, or say it once, but then have to keep saying over and over and over. It's like, wait, if everybody's asking the same question, maybe I should create something that is recorded. Could be video, audio, online, written, or all the above. And I know you do that kind of stuff where you repurpose things, right? Like you repurpose it in all their, people, they talk about love languages in the relationship side, right? Yeah. There's also the learning languages, right? Which is how do people like to absorb content? Can you create that? By the way, that's the whole reason I created the podcast in the beginning was one, in case I died young, my kids would have something that I could teach legacy wise. Wow. And then two, I was getting tired of people asking the same questions. I'm like, well, instead of me answering this question for 20 minutes, go check out this episode.
Oh my gosh, I do that all the time. That's hilarious. No, that's amazing. And honestly, rightfully so, that's what I'm going to do with this episode. Because, if someone asks me, hey, Ruben, I feel like I'm leaving money on the table. Oh, no kidding. You think so? Well, you should tap into Chris Miles' episode 130. By the time this comes out, 130 something. We're not quite at 500 yet, like my man here. Chris is running the marathon and right behind him. But I mean, I love that. I recently, I want to share a little bit with the audience because I think what Chris is talking about is so important. Know your worth, but also know what the marketplace is offering. It's just so important for you to understand. And I'm working with a coach right now that's all high ticket. He makes you feel uncomfortable. Like, are you sure people are going to charge? Like, I should be charging that much? Yes. I think it's important because people will see that if you're just at the market level, there's literally people out there literally willing to spend more because it just means that, oh yeah, it means it's better. Like 100%, you've separated yourself from the pack, right? And I think it's, you talked also about the value ladder, which is something that, Russell Brunson talks about all the time. Now I'm pulling out all my digital marketing guys. I'm sure you can see me like a straight through mirror. But anyways, he talks about like literally list everything, right? And I love the FAQs, but list everything that you can add and make it so it's so obvious that this guy's over delivering. Like if you over deliver, you don't have to worry about charging. You really don't because you're over delivering. And I think that's what's going to make, separate the, great from the good if you're able to over deliver. So that's fascinating. I love that because I think as an entrepreneur, you have the ability to turn on that switch and from today and be like, you know what, this is what we're going with now. And this is the new price or based on what we're able to offer, just knowing your worth. So I love that you touch on that. And I guess the thing that comes to me as an investor, I always say I'm a business entrepreneur first, and then I pour my money into real estate, just because I feel like you can have a direct control. It's a riskier in business, but you can have that more direct control. Do you see things the same way, or do you see things more like, oh, you know what? No, Ruben, I focus on just reoccurring income opportunities first before I dive into the risk. I guess what would you say? Because you're the guy who's done it multiple times. So how should one think about this? Am I all in on the business, or now after having this conversation with Chris, nope, start looking at opportunities that can also kind of bring again that freedom lifestyle where maybe you don't even have to even strategize or make another strategic partnership or increase sales in a way. Which one do you lean towards more?
You're absolutely right. It's a little of both, but I would definitely say business first, right? Like the business is like your economic engine, that's the thing that can finance your deals, right? It's just like, I remember I was putting money into some things in my podcast, or even better yet, I've been on John Lee Dumas's show, Entrepreneur on Fire 3 times, right? Like the third one's going to air, in May of this year.
Good for you.
But that second time I was on a show, the first time I was on a show, I paid $2,000 to basically write a book with him and Tim Ferriss, right? And I got books from it, but then I was able to get in the door with him to get on the show. That first interview paid me, $30,000. The second time around, it's now over 4 million and counting. The money I've made from the second show I did with him. So when he said, "Hey, pay $600 in journals," I'm like, done.
Yeah. What can you give? I love that long-term thinking as well, because a lot of people, don't be a penny wise and a dollar foolish, right? I mean, think long-term, strategic, upfront, then you get the value. So for you in your mind, can you I think that's so interesting because our listeners, we know John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneurs on Fire. I mean, the guy's just crushing it. He's fascinating, such great energy, positive energy. So what was your thinking? Just to give, as you finish off this story, which you did such a good job, is in your world, how did you see the opportunity, and then how did you seize it? Do you want to give a little bit more context on that?
Yeah. I mean, the opportunity I saw was, I knew that there was exposure, right? There's no doubt and you never know who it's going to touch. That's why I didn't realize the second time around, because the second time around, it was really one person that reached out to me months later to have me on his show. And then from that, just created this whole firestorm of stuff, right? Because it got me connected with another guy, and actually, I'm still connected to that guy today, still educating his people. A lot of it on the infinite banking stuff, right? Primarily on that. That's what he wanted for his real estate investors. but it broke me into that whole real estate world so much more easily. That, I mean, like I said, the ROI just keeps going, and so it is long-term, because by the time he reached out, it was probably 6 months after that episode aired. It wasn't like it was overnight success. I did get people following me, and yeah, people reached out to me, but again, like, to me, it's always about getting that ROI. That being said, right, you can only, I like getting the max ROI possible out of everything. So even in my business, right, like, I know I put that money in there, but if someone said, hey, well, if you paid, $1,000 to be on that show, right? Or I think I actually paid the third time to be on John's show, I think $4,000 or $5,000. I can't remember what it was, right?
Yeah.
I didn't care. It didn't matter, because I knew the ROI was going to be bigger. But even then, if someone said, well, hey, you could pay $5,000 for these other shows too, so that's $50,000. Say it's 10 shows, $50,000. Well, I may not get the same ROI. In fact, there's that law of diminishing return, right? So in your business, you got to be careful that you could put into marketing and get a really good ROI, but if you keep pumping more money in, sometimes the ROI starts dropping on you. So I like to get to the point where I get that max ROI, almost like getting that match on your 401k for those people that still want to do it, even after we talked here. It's like, I want that 100% match, but I'm not going to keep going because it's not going to return me. I'm going to stop there and then take my money and put it elsewhere. That is what you should be doing with the other side, with passive investing, right? With doing other things like real estate is, hey, I can keep pumping money in my business, but there's going to be a point where it just doesn't make sense anymore. Let's get those profits out of the business. By the way, if you quote Mike Michalowicz, who wrote Profit First, if you're always, quote unquote, reinvesting money into your business, you're not profitable. You are just spending money. Like I
haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, if you think about it, like, if you're always pumping money in because I'm reinvesting, it's a sexy way of saying I'm spending all the money I'm making in my business, right? So if you keep doing that, what will happen, and I've seen this with myself and others over the decades, right, is that you will constantly always be growing this business, but you will always be a slave to it. You're like, hey, this business is making great money, but unless I sell it, unless I get out of it, I'm stuck, right? So the key is, yes, do invest some money in the business, but also invest money that goes to you personally that you can invest in other things, so that if for whatever reason, say the government says, hey, you're not a necessary business, like they were telling some of us last year, we're shutting you down, whether you like it or not. And it doesn't matter if you're at the top of your game, you're shut down. You've got other streams of income to back you up. Doesn't matter. And I don't care if you're a network marketer and you think you'll be paid forever, which is a great and a dream la la land, but that's not true either. Like, you got to make sure you have multiple streams of income paying in. And so some of that money for your business needs also to pay to buy investments that will pay you money each and every month.
Wow, that was powerful. That last one, as an entrepreneur, reinvesting to the business, you got to grow the business. That one hit me, because it's like, if you keep reinvesting, it's like an expense. It's an expense. It's ongoing expense forever. I never even thought about it like that. Obviously, with all things considered, because some of us are looking to scale our businesses. But I think what you're saying is a key point, is to take some of that, take some profit, and put it to work. Like I'm going to quote you, the soldiers, create more soldiers, make the dollar, put the dollar to work. Man, I got to get this guy a patent on all these things, man. So you came in here, you talked to us about the importance of making your money work. The money leaks, then we talk about the anti-financial advisor kind of approach to the traditional conventional investing, which everyone is following, rewiring our brains so that we can think of money differently, diversifying income. And when we say that income that gets invested, that creates recurring income and passive income, I mean, now that we're here, we've come full circle. You retired twice, which we discussed. Now, the second part, you said you had messed up, and I want to make sure you leave a little gem as we come at the top of the hour here. What would you tell your 30-year-old to 20-year-old self, with all the knowledge you've acquired now, with all the different policies, right? We're talking about leveraging and all sorts of real estate. And what would you just tell yourself, younger Chris? What do you think would be something like, dang, I wish I would have known this 25, 30 years ago? Is there one thing that jumps out at you?
The biggest thing would be follow your gut. Like follow your intuition, because almost every mistake I made, I had a feeling deep down that maybe it was a mistake, but either because of greed or impatience or some other emotion getting in the way, it stopped me or got me to go on a different course, or hearing other people's voices. Like there's been times that I was, people would tell me, hey, this makes sense. This makes logical sense. You should do this. But my heart or my gut would tell me something different. I'm like, yeah, but they know better. They're my coach or whatever, right? I'll tell you, my business and my life exploded when I started listening to myself more than just other people. Like I'll take their information, I'll take their advice and counsel and let it filter through. But at the end of the day is this right for me? And
I got to ask you, Chris, when you say that, does the gut, is this the gut that has collected enough data to now have can you reinvent your gut? Was your gut matured at that point? Do you think your gut is just your gut? Do you know what I mean? Because can you make the same gut decision when you have more data and you're a little bit more savvier? Like I'm wondering if your gut today of savvy Chris Miles is the same gut at 20 years old. What are your thoughts on that? I don't think I've ever.
I think it is.
Yeah, interesting.
I married a woman that I shouldn't have married when I was, about 22 years old, and I felt something. But again, I felt pressure, like, oh, but our parents are paying for the wedding. I should just go through with it. I'll make it work. And then it didn't, right? And business is kind of like a marriage, and so is investing, like, they're like, well, I feel like I'm forcing it, but I should just make it work, and that's the problem with a lot of us that do, often just like to just be busy bees sometimes, right? Like just work. Even though I'm only part-time, I still like to do something. I always have to do something, And I'll tell you, 2015, I was actually going through my second divorce. So just so you know, the show, you should never take my marital advice. So I'm on marriage number 3, third time's the charm, hopefully, right? And so, second divorce I was going through was hard. I had a bunch of kids involved in that divorce and everything. I was emotionally shutting down. And at that time, the business coach was telling me, Chris, hey, we need to ramp up we need to scale you up a little bit more. You need to do more events. You should do one live event a month. Now, I had done 6 events that year. I had about burned out. Now, divorce burns people out in general, right? But I was at the point of saying, I don't want to do more events. Even if I could, it was such a hard deal trying to put butts in seats, right? And that kind of thing. And I remember just feeling it out. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do more. I'm going to do less. So I went against all logic, right? All of my own logic was, I'm going to do 3 events next year, not even the 6 I did this year, or even 12 that I've been recommending. I'm going to do 3. And guess what? I was more profitable and I doubled my revenue that year by doing less, because sometimes less can be more, right?
Yes.
And so even though all wisdom and advice would say, yes, you should do this, this makes mathematical sense, still, when your intuition tells you something, listen to it.
Wow. I like that. So you've got the data, you've got the plug, you got the book here, you got the insight minus the marital advice. He said it, right? Which is okay. Third time's a charm. I know we're rooting for you there, Chris. Not worried about you, my friend. Beyond Rice and Beans is the book that's out there. MoneyRipples.com is where you've set and laid your foundation. Where else can the people find out more about what you're doing and tap into all the wisdom that you've given us today, even more if they want to?
Yeah, like you said, besides, I was going to say Beyond Rice and Beans, besides the website, moneyripples.com, you can also check out my podcast, The Chris Miles Money Show, on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcast app is too.
Absolutely. We'll make sure if you're driving, keep your hands on the wheel. We will include this in the show notes. Behave. Listen to Chris's advice. It was wonderful today. I can't thank you enough for putting on your lab coat, your cash flowing lab coat with a load of cash, and letting us know how we can actually make our monies work for themselves. And I appreciate you so much stepping to the lab. It was really humbling to be in your presence and kind of learn from you. I think it's really going to resonate with our listeners who are entrepreneurs, real estate investors, and just folks who want to get more out of their life and create a freedom lifestyle. So on that note, Chris, we thank you so much for coming. And just like that, we are out.